Tyler from Bossier City, Louisiana. Do you think Kevin Nash gets unfairly criticized for his WWF title run in 1995, given some of the stiffs they put him in the ring with, especially Mabel, at SummerSlam? I mean, he didn't work with that many stiffs that year. I mean, he worked 2 pay-per-view matches in 95 with Sid, which really weren't any good. The Lumberjack match may have been marginally better than their match at the first In Your House, but neither match was all that good. And the match with Mabel sucked. But look at the other names he worked with on pay-per-view that year. He worked with Bret Hart, who gave him the second best match of his career at Survivor Series. After the In Your House match he had later with Shawn Michaels, I put this one at number 2 as far as his greatest matches. I mean, some people might even like that one more than the Good Friends, Better Enemies match that he had with Shawn. So he worked with Shawn at WrestleMania as well, WrestleMania 11. He wrestled the British Bulldog that October at In Your House. That match was horrendous. But I wouldn't call Davey Boy a stiff. They just had a boring match. They had a bad match. It happens. So I don't think you can just excuse it away by blaming it on the quality of his opponents. Because if you do that, you're shitting on Bret Hart, you're shitting on Shawn Michaels, and you're shitting on the British Bulldog. And I don't think that's right. Part of it was having to work babyface. I think Diesel as a heel would have done better as champion than he did that year as a babyface. He'd have more smaller opponents to work with, similar to Bret and Shawn, or guys that at least were in 7 feet like he was. And it probably would have made him far more interesting as a character. I mean, look, case in point, the tweener turn that came after Survivor Series in 95, the night after he dropped the title. You know, from that moment right up until the point that he left the company, Diesel was the first cool heel that company had. Unless you consider, Roddy Piper to be a cool heel back in the 80s, then I guess he would be the first. But I would argue that Diesel probably was, the first to really fill that role in the WWF. But Vince McMahon wanted to copy the Hogan blueprint. The same thing he tried and failed doing with Lex Luger. And by the way, that match with Mabel, since you brought up Mabel, not everybody may know this, but they supposedly lobbied for their match not to go on last that night because they knew that nothing would be able to top the ladder match with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. That was the night of their ladder rematch at SummerSlam in 95. They had to do something to make the card more appealing, so they changed it. It was going to be Shawn against Sid for the title. And instead, Sid got his title shot on TV, I think, the following week. And they did a ladder match instead. And so Diesel and Mabel, they went to Vince, they went to management and said, look, don't put us on last. Right? There's no way that we're going to be able to top what these guys do. And Vince McMahon said no. He believed firmly that the championship match should always headline the show. Which, not always the case, right? You could find examples like even Survivor Series back in 91, when Undertaker beat Hogan, that didn't headline the show, but I guess as a general rule, Vince McMahon did not like putting the championship match on anywhere but the main event. He just felt that that's not what you do with your championship. It's almost like he gave a shit about the titles, wouldn't you know? But, again, you can point to examples where that wasn't true. In fact, you can point to an example that year. What am I talking about Hogan and Undertaker for in 91? That very same year, WrestleMania! They didn't headline with Diesel and Shawn. They put that on second to last. They headlined with Lawrence Taylor against Bam Bam Bigelow in the main event because they're star fuckers in that company. And they love their celebrities. So they put that in the main event of the show. Because that really was, I guess it was the biggest attraction on the card, but so much for putting your world title match on last. So they went out there in the main event, and of course, there was nothing they could do to top the ladder match. I mean, you knew that going in. There was nothing those two guys could do, right? That was going to be able to top the ladder match. That was a given. But that night was the beginning of the end for Mabel and his big push. And not just because he lost to Diesel. I mean, it was going to probably largely be over anyway because he wasn't winning the championship, but he hurt Kevin Nash during the match. Mabel had injured a few people that year. I think he injured Fatu. There was something with Fatu where he hurt him, I think. He injured The Undertaker later that year at a live event. Undertaker was coming off the ropes, I think, and Mabel put his arm and his fist out for a clothesline. He caught Undertaker in the eye. That's where he caved his eye socket in. So then they shot some angle on TV to, explain the injury away. Oh, he got injured on a splash or a leg drop or something. That's not how he got injured. He got injured before that. He got injured on a live event. Or maybe that was taped. Actually, that might have been taped before the injury, come to think of it. But then after the fact on TV, they credited it to like a Mabel leg drop or something, but he caved this guy's eye socket in. So hardly the only guy that he injured that year. Mabel would do this sit-out splash where he would stand over his opponent and he would just drop. If you remember Rikishi, 2000, 2001, that was one of Rikishi's moves. Rikishi did the same move, but at least he did it safely. He also wasn't as big as Mabel was. But at the time, Nash had a bad back coming into the Summerslam match. And he told Mabel, this is according to Nash, he told Mabel, don't sit on my back. I don't want to take the move. I have a bad back. Don't do it. And so what happened? In the middle of the match, Mabel sat right down on Kevin Nash's back. Now, if you go back and you watch it, that match, Nash lets out a scream when Mabel sits on his back. That ain't selling. He says he couldn't feel his legs. And you could hear him, he was cussing out Mabel. I mean, you can kind of make it out if you listen close enough. He's cussing the guy out. He's like, fuck, what the fuck? I don't know. Again, I don't remember how much of it was audible, but I do remember when I first heard, I think it was Nash told the story, and I went back and I watched it. You could definitely hear there's some cussing and some talking going on in the ring. However much of it is actually audible. And so, he's screaming at this guy while he's sitting on his back, and that ended the Mabel push. I mean, if there was any doubt at all at that point, there was no doubt. That was going to be it for him. So Nash had to go through a fair amount of shit himself that year, is the point that I'm trying to make here. Is the criticism of his run a one-way street? No, it isn't. Vince McMahon deserves some of the blame as well. It did not work. They tried, and it did not work. But if the circumstances were different, if he worked as a heel, if he had different opponents, perhaps things might have gone differently.